Mr. Slager. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Are you ready?
We are ready to proceed, Chairperson.
Okay. Yes.
The witness for this morning is Ms. Bianca Goodson. She's ready to take the oath of affirmation, and then I will give a brief summary.
Yeah. Okay, please administer the oath of affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Bianca Goodson.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No?
Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
Yes?
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you for coming to assist the commission, Ms. Goodson. Thank you.
Chair, I realize that people who sit in this chair don't often ask, how are you doing?
So you want to ask? I'm fine, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Slager.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Chairperson, Ms. Goodson is going to give evidence to the Commission in relation to her time at Trillian Management Consulting, the interaction between Trillian Management Consulting and Mckinsey, as well as the interaction of the two companies with Eskom. She will refer to whatever services
Reach out, right? So I read through the documents and I reached out to him and we had a subsequent meeting. And I asked the question, but what is Trillian's role? Because clearly this work at Eskom was negotiated between Eskom and Mckinsey. What is the role of Trillian? And Mr. Angel said to me that Trillian would be the supply development partner for Mckinsey in this work. So this is now towards the end of October 2015. And
towards the end of?
October 2015.
October 2015.
Yeah, I'm still employed at Anglo-American during this time.
He will lead you.
Yeah.
Must I carry on?
No, you want to carry on?
Yeah, because I want to explain how I got onboarded.
Oh, yes.
Must I go all the way?
Yes.
Okay. So I met with Mr. Angel the second time and understood then that the relationship or the revenue for Trillian would be predominantly through Eskom, because that work was secured. And it would be through working with Mckinsey as the supplier development partner. Mr. Angel then said it would be prudent for me to meet with the shareholder, because there was one majority shareholder of Trillian. Trillian would he didn't explain the structure to me at that time, which I'll explain to you a bit later, but the holding company had one major shareholder, and that shareholder's name was Salim Essa, Mr. Salim Essa.
Which one was the holding company?
The holding company, the way I understood it at the time, was Trillian Capital Partners. So maybe I should explain the structure now.
You can do so, yes.
Okay. My understanding was that Trillian Capital Partners was the overall company, very similar to Anglo-American group of companies, so to say. And then underneath, there were 5 subsidiary companies. Right? And the subsidiary companies were Trillian Management Consulting, of which I was being interviewed at the time to become the CEO. There would be Trillian Financial Advisory, of which Ms. Masila Mathepu would become the CEO. There was Trillian Securities, of which Mr. Eric Wood would be the acting CEO. There was Trillian Asset Management, of which Mr. Daniel Roy would be the CEO. And then lastly, at the time when I was having these discussions, there was discussions about another subsidiary called Trillian Properties, of which Mr. Mark Pomansky was earmarked to be the CEO. It was also explained to me that Mr. Eric Wood would eventually become the CEO of the group, the holding company, but only at the 1st of March 2016. So Mr. Angel explained this to me and then mentioned that it was prudent that I meet the major shareholder of the holding company, which would be Mr. Salim Essa, prior to us progressing any further with these discussions. So I met Mr. Essa for the first time. Again, I tried to Google him prior to meeting him, and I didn't really find anything in the internet. At that time, he was a very unknown entity. So I had no reasons to be suspicious or concerned. I met Mr. Essa as a second interview. Sorry, I'm not getting my chronology correct. Prior to me meeting Mr. Essa, I had a meeting before, and that meeting was with Mr. Eric Wood and Mr. Mohammed Bobat, and it was part of the interview process, so to say. And it was in that meeting that Mr. Wood explained to me his transition, that he was at Regiments at the time, and that as of the 1st of March of the following year, he would become the CEO of Trillian. I didn't ask him details about why he was leaving. Mr. Mohammed Bobat asked me a few questions, things like, did I have experience with the PFMA, which I answered no, because I didn't come from the private sector.
Where did this meeting take place?
This meeting took place in the Integrated Capital Management's office in Melrose.
In Melrose Arch.
In Melrose Arch, yeah.
And your meetings with Mr. Clive Angel?
All in the same office.
So you do go to Melrose Arch for these
Melrose
meetings?
Arch, yeah.
Okay.
And then when I met with Mr. Salim Essa, it was also in Melrose Arch, a different office. Basically, it was where Integrated Capital Management's offices were, just one floor up. You could park in the same basement and just walk everywhere. Anyway, so when I met Mr. Essa for the first time, it was an interesting interview because it felt as though he was selling the company to me as opposed to me trying to sell my skills and competence to him. And I found it a bit bizarre. So Mr. Essa went on to say that his vision for Trillian Management Consulting was that it would compete in the same space as the likes of Mckinsey. And at that time, a leading management consultant, South African management consulting company was Letsema. And he says, why is it only Letsema and Mckinsey in the public sector space? There needs to become a new business, a new proudly South African black management consulting company that also competes in that space. And that was his vision for this entity. At the time, load shedding was rife. He mentioned to me that the intention was to go into Eskom to help reduce load shedding and help Eskom become a first world utility. And it sounded exciting. So Mr. Essa was really selling this opportunity to me. And towards the end of the interview, he asked me to tell me about yourself. And I'm not too sure what came over me at the time, but I actually decided to tell him a lot about my upbringing. I come from Pietermaritzburg, small community, very, very strong family values. My parents are very religious. And I went into that type of detail. The next day, I got an email from Clive saying, Salim likes you. If you want the job, it's yours. That's how I got onboarded. I formally signed my offer of employment in about November 2015. However, I had to fill out my resignation period at Anglo-American. So I only formally started working for Trillian on the 1st of January, or the first working day of January 2016.
You signed your employment contract on the 17th of November 2015.
I believe my affidavit, yes. That has more details than I remember at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what did you say about January 2016?
I only formally started. My start date in that contract, the effective date, so to say, is 1st of Jan, although it was signed in November. I had a resignation period that I had to honor at Anglo-American still.
So from the time you signed the employment contract, 17 November 2015, to the time you officially resumed your employment, what were you doing?
It was a very interesting time. I had accumulated quite a lot of annual leave from Anglo-American at the time, So in that period, call it about 6 weeks, so the last 2 weeks of November and the month of December 2015, I had taken my leave in lieu of my resignation period, so to say. But technically, I was still an employee of Anglo-American. And I had mentioned this to Mr. Angel, and Mr. Angel had said to me that I need to get my skin in the game. So he had arranged numerous meetings for me with the Mckinsey team. It was obviously clear to me from the documents that Mr. Angel had given me prior that Mckinsey had started at least negotiating towards working on this contract. So it was in December, very early December 2015, I had already met quite a few members of the Mckinsey team that were working on the Eskom Top Engineers program. In addition to that, I was also introduced to a company called eGateway, an Indian and Emirati company, and I was told that this would be the company that Trillian subcontracts for one of the work streams at Eskom. So we had quite a few meetings during that period. So it was as though I was working, or it was quite active.
And this is, I mean, when you go to them, you go into Melrose Arch offices.
Yes, almost all the time, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So official commencement of your employment contract is 1 January 2016. How long did you remain there?
It was the shortest job I've ever had in my life, Chairman. I resigned on the 19th of March 2016. So I was employed for, what does that make it, 2.5 months, rounded up to 3 months.
Yeah.
I've never ever stayed in a position that quickly. Yeah.
So what you will tell the chairperson is your experience in that relatively short space of time.
Yeah.
Let's then go into the services that Trillian, rather your position. What is your position on Trillian?
So my position in Trillian was the CEO of one of the subsidiaries, the Trillian Management Consulting subsidiary.
Yes.
You were the CEO of TMC.
Correct.
Yes, and there were, as you said, a number of subsidiaries, and there was the holding company.
Correct.
So I guess it's going to be important to refer to TMC as TMC and to the holding company as the holding company and whatever other subsidiaries, so that we are sure which entity we are talking about.
I'll be clear on that.
Yes, okay, all right.
Yes.
I'm mentioning this because it's easy to just say Trillian.
Yeah.
And then one doesn't know which entity. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so your position is CEO of TMC.
Correct.
And what, from your experience at the time, what services was TMC providing?
So TMC was intended to be a stock standard management consulting company, so very similar to what the services that Mckinsey or the likes of Accenture or Deloitte would offer. It wasn't any specialized services in any way. If I assumed that if we encountered a client that needed specialized services in the realm of finance, that one of the other subsidiaries that was more applicable would then take up the work. But management consulting is quite, in my opinion, it's very generic services that entities generally bring on board if they just don't have the manpower or the experience to do it themselves. So it wasn't specialized in any way. Now that I say that, it's maybe worth mentioning that Mr. Angel also did tell me, and I did come to know, that this Top Engineers program was awarded, so to say. I'll come and explain that a bit later. To Mckinsey and its SDNL, so Supplier Development Partner, on a confined basis, on the basis that they were offering specialized services. And I don't believe that management consulting is a specialized service in any way.
Yeah, you can go into it.
Okay?
The Top Engineers program.
Yes.
Was it already a project or program given to Mckinsey by the time you were appointed at TMC?
That's what I understood. So I've mentioned, Chair, that I had met with the Mckinsey teams in December 2015. I still hadn't formally taken on my role as CEO of TMC at that point. And it seemed to me that the Mckinsey team were streaks ahead in terms of delivering work against this program. They had established teams. They had already got, for example, work schedules in terms of what work needed to be done. They were prepared and ready to hit the ground running first thing in January. And I felt as TMC on my back foot because TMC didn't even have any employees at the time. It was just me. So Mckinsey had already started doing something towards this program. And the program consisted of 4 specific work streams. I'm not too sure if Mr. Seleka would like me to explain them now or later.
Well, maybe before you go on, just in 1 or 2 sentences, explain what was the object of this top engineers program.
It was so convoluted, I'll try really hard to put it into sentences. The top engineers program, if you take it literally, talks about top engineers, literally. So the intention was to create skills within Eskom that gave you, what is the word that I'm looking for? It was as if you had succession planning, right? And you retained the IP and you retained the skills within the organization to sustain the business in 4 specific areas. Looking at the generation workstream. So how do we generate energy? Looking at procurement in terms of what are they spending. There was a claims workstream, and then there was a primary energy workstream. And the intention was to take Eskom employees in each of those different areas and actually build them up so that they could, in essence, in the long run, replace the likes of Mckinsey, so that Eskom would have its own Mckinsey in-house, so to say. But the plan was that while you do that, you've got these subcontractors or these consultants like Mckinsey and Trillian walking the journey with the Eskom employees. That's the way I understood it.
So the idea wasn't to take new graduates and train them and give them certain opportunities so that in long term they could be top engineers available to Eskom. It would be to take people who are already engineers but help them to get to the top of their game.
I wish I could, I wish I could answer that in more detail. The thing is, Mckinsey just didn't get me involved and didn't even require Trillian to get involved in that recruitment process, and that recruitment process was extensive. My understanding, I don't know if I can say categorically yes to the question that you ask. What I do know for certain, though, is that it was employees within Eskom. So whether those employees were already qualified or working towards a qualification, I don't know. But it certainly was people. It wasn't external recruits. It was all employees of Eskom.
Okay.
Yes. Did Trillian had any role to play in the rendition of the services relating to the top engineers program?
Trillian was supposed to have a role to play. Because we were the supply development partner, we were supposed to be working with Mckinsey to deliver on the objective. And I tried so hard to work with Mckinsey, but Mckinsey made it impossible. Absolutely impossible. Sorry, I'm running away with myself, but to the extent that I remember attending a leadership meeting, Mckinsey and Trillian, in a leadership meeting at the Mckinsey offices in January, and one of the principals of Mckinsey said, because I was fighting to say, why don't you guys want us to put people on the ground? If we don't put people to work, how do we get paid? And I remember the one principal saying to me, why do you care? You'll get your money anyway. And I couldn't understand, how could we get paid if we weren't working? So I tried so hard to get people involved in delivering, to contribute. I mean, I come from mining. The primary energy workstream, for example, would have been one of the work streams that I could add more value than anybody on the Mckinsey team because of my experience. Mckinsey wouldn't get me involved. We were completely sidelined. So does that answer your question, Mr. Seleka? There was an attempt to deliver.
Yes. I think you should also explain to the chairperson whether, or rather the contractual relationship between TMC and Mckinsey, because there's evidence to the effect that there was no contract between the two. You were the CEO at the time. You were in a better position to know what was going on.
Absolutely. I'm going to start referencing one other individual. That gentleman's name is Ben Bernard. He became a COO. So before I get to that question, because answering some of these questions for Mr. Seleka, I need to reference my COO. Mr. Bernard onboarded, he worked with me at Anglo-American, so also had extensive experience in the mining industry. And he joined Trillian also in January of 2016 from Anglo-American. So we started working in Trillian together in January. So it was myself and my COO. And we had all these meetings with Mckinsey, and during the meetings, especially when the meetings were not necessarily going well, so when I would want to influence the work stream, for example, and they would get pushed back, Ben and I always would try and default to a contract. So we spoke to Mr. Angel, we were like, is there an existing contract? Clearly there was negotiations for this work prior, right? And Mr. Angel said to me, no, there's no existing contract. We spoke to Mr. Vikas Sagar, who was a director at Mckinsey, and we spoke about we have to put a contract in place that governs the relationship between the two entities. So Mr. Sagar, at some point, please forgive me, I'm getting the chronology not 100% right, but I'm just trying to answer your question on the contract. At some point during my tenure, and I seem to remember that it was sometime, I think towards the end of January, it could very well be the beginning of February, and Mr. Sagar sent me a 2 or 3 pager subcontractors agreement. But you must keep in mind at the time that the cash flows for this project, this top engineer project, were going to the regions of about 10 billion rand over 3 years. Okay? And the subcontractors agreement that was sent to me was about 3 pages long. And my COO and I were asked to sign it. Right? So I looked at the subcontractors agreement and I was like, there's no way that you could sign a 3-pager that was so loose and fluffy to govern a transaction that's worth 10 billion for an SOE. So I tracked changes, and in almost every single sentence in that subcontractors agreement, I had issue with, and I sent it back to Mckinsey. By the time I resigned, I had not received any feedback on that subcontractors agreement. So what I'm aware of is that there was a discussion about a subcontractors agreement, there were initial communications about one, but during my very short tenure, I'd never seen a signed copy. Sorry, and I certainly didn't sign a copy.
You certainly didn't
Absolutely
sign.
not.
Also, explain the distinction between what has been referred to as a corporate plan and the master service agreement, which I see you deal with also to some extent in your affidavit. Just enlighten us on the distinction between the two.
Okay. Chair, is it okay that I'm not going in a chronological order? It's okay, okay.
No, he will guide you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he will rein you in when you go
Because
to
I'm just trying to
one.
answer the questions, and these things didn't quite happen sequentially.
Yeah, no, he will ask you the questions, and he knows what he's looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
At the end, if there is something important that you feel you were not asked to talk about that you want to share, then you will have that chance. But he will guide you. He knows what he's looking for.
Okay. Sorry, so please, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, just the distinction between what is referred to as the corporate plan and the master service agreement.
Okay. So this is, sorry, I chuckle because of what I know now in hindsight. The top engineers program consisted of only 4 work streams. Okay?
4 work streams.
Yes, and I'll repeat them for you.
Yeah.
There was generation, there was primary energy, there was claims, and there was procurement. It was only those 4. There's no corporate plan.
Yeah. But where did
Okay.
they fall? The corporate plan or master service?
So the reason why I'm saying this to you, Chen, and how I know that it only included 4, is because during my tenure, I got sight of what was the master services agreement, the draft at that time, for this program, and it only referenced those 4 work streams, right? So that was the scope of the contract to my understanding. The corporate plan was something that during my tenure, I want to try very much to answer the question based on what I knew then and not what I know now. I had no idea then what the corporate plan was because it was nothing to do with Trillian Management Consulting. Nobody asked me to do the work. We didn't have people to do the work. It didn't fall within the scope of the MSA. After watching numerous these sessions, the commission sessions, I now understand that the corporate plan fits it into something else. But it certainly wasn't anything that I was aware of. Certainly not Trillian Management Consulting and not Trillian Financial Advisory as far as I knew. But I could be wrong with that, but definitely not Trillian Management Consulting.
Yes.
Can I just take you back a little bit to this program of top engineers? Did Trillian have any engineers?
Any engineers? No. So when I was at Trillian for those 3 months, for the first 2 months there were only 2 employees. It was myself and my COO. Right? On the 1st of March, when people came over from regiments, there were about 50 employees or so, I think, that came over from regiments. I think there were a few engineers in that contingent of people.
Sorry, just repeat that.
I think there were a few individuals within that team that transferred that had studied engineering. I don't know if they had certified engineering qualifications though. But yes, we eventually did on the 1st of March have some engineers.
Yes. Would you say how many that you knew of?
Not many, a handful.
Yeah.
So 5, call it roughly 5.
Yes.
But keep in mind, Chairman, that when I signed my offer of employment, I was told by Mr. Angel that E-Gateway were the specialists in generation. And they had the qualification. But there's a lot to be said about that,
Yeah.
but I'll leave it for now.
Okay. And as far as you know, Mckinsey had lots of engineers?
Yes, no, not, sorry, let me ask you a question. What is a lot? What does a lot mean?
Well, it depends, what would you regard 10, 20? It just depends
Out
on
of
you.
the team that
You
I
give me your
met-
own view of whether they had a lot and whether that's my lot, that's another issue.
No. I think the Mckinsey, if I could give you an indication of the Mckinsey team, and the Mckinsey team eventually for this program became quite big. It was like about 100 people. It was a very significant team. I think the qualifications that you found within there, when I say qualifications, I'm just talking about degrees, not certifications, would be along the lines of finance. There were a lot of people that had MBAs. Dr. Weiss, for example, was an engineer. And there were probably, again, about a handful, at most 2, of people that had studied engineering. But the rest were more in the lines of finance.
I'm trying to understand what was sought to be done, what was really sought to be achieved by the top engineers program, because the first impression I get when you say to me top engineers is that those people are really at the top of their profession in terms of how good they are. Okay? Now, the program was not called top managers. It was top engineers. And if the people you are talking about who are going to be in the program are not people who are already top engineers, but you want to make them top engineers, I would expect that you need top engineers to make this group of engineers top engineers. You would need engineers to make them top engineers. That would be the first impression that one would get. If Mr. Selega wants to make somebody a young lawyer, a top lawyer, he must at least be a lawyer himself. Preferably, he must be a top lawyer himself.
Absolutely, it takes one to know one, as you would say.
Yeah, so that's why I'm trying to find out whether Trillian had engineers, had top engineers, but it might be easier to say they had engineers, maybe to say whether it was top engineers. Mckinsey, the same thing. You want to say something?
Would it help if I explained what the different work streams were intended to do? And then you'll actually find that it didn't have much to do with engineering at all.
Yes,
Okay.
Explain
Can I
that.
explain that? Okay. So I've mentioned the four, okay? In my experience, and I'm not that young, and I've got quite a bit of experience, but out of the four, the only work stream that had a very significant reliance on the engineering faculty, the pure engineering faculty being civils, electrical, and mechanical, was the generation work stream. That because it was highly technical, and I know this because I come from mining, right? That was the only place where you maybe would have needed some technical insight to actually increase the performance of the power stations, right? But what was so bizarre about that in itself is that the work stream that Mckinsey were putting forward to bring about these efficiencies within the power stations, nothing to do with engineering. They were proposing a human capital optimization. They wanted to restructure the people and the processes not the technical processes, the business processes of the power station to bring about the efficiency that Eskom sought to achieve. So technically, if you are going to try and restructure your human capital and improve your business processes, albeit for a power station, you don't really need engineering qualifications for that, right? So that was the generation work stream. On the primary energy work stream, I also thought that to an extent that would seek some sort of guidance from the likes of mining engineering, right? Because you are looking at the coal mines and you're looking to optimize the quality of coal that you're getting out of the mines to bring into the power stations, right? But that's not what Mckinsey was doing. What Mckinsey were doing in that specific work stream was renegotiating the cost-plus contracts. So that is more contractual work stream. Then you come to the procurement work stream. The procurement work stream was basically just looking to optimize the spend, the commodity spend of Eskom. So in essence, what they were doing is this term that management consultants throw around called strategic sourcing, where you would say, okay, because I'm Eskom and because I've got economies of scale, I can take my entire spend on computers, for example, go to one supplier and say that because I want to buy such bulk, I need the best price. That's all that they were doing in procurement, okay? Put very simply. In claims, they had lawyers on the team because they were negotiating contractual claims, both third party, against Eskom and for Eskom. So it was lawyers. So as you can see within those four realms, although it's called Top Engineers Program, there really wasn't a reliance on any engineers from the way that Mckinsey had proposed to do the work. Okay, I felt differently. I felt that generation should have technical expertise, which would have been engineers, and I felt the same about primary energy, but my voice wasn't heard in the Mckinsey team.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I deflect.
No, that's fine. You mentioned earlier that Mckinsey was appointed on a confinement basis. Now, in respect of which of the
top
two?
engineers.
Was it the top engineers?
Top engineers program.
Did the top engineers fall under the master service agreement?
Correct. The master services agreement. The top engineers program was referred to by two different names. It was you either referred to it as top engineers or the Eskom turnaround plan, but it was exactly the same thing. And the MSA, the master services agreement, governed, because it's the same thing, those two things. People just use the names, the reference interchangeably.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to add more acronyms, and it just makes things more confusing. And
No, I have that. And let's go back to the proposal that Trillian should be the supplier development partner. So I think you mentioned that 2 or 3 page document, which is a subcontract. Was that in relation to this master service agreement?
correct.
You did track changes on it?
Yes.
You sent it back,
Yes.
but by the time you left, it was never signed,
To the best of my knowledge,
to the
absolutely.
best of your knowledge.
There were too many issues. That entire contract would have to be completely redrafted. And after sending my comments back to Mckinsey, I heard nothing about it following that, and I did follow up, but I never received feedback. But the contract needed to be completely redrafted. My home loan agreement, for example, that's a lot less than 10 billion, is a lot more extensive than just 3 pages.
Yeah. But then during the 3 months that you were there, with that subcontract not having been signed, what was the relationship between Trillian, TMC, and McKinsey?
The relationship was based on, it was at risk, and it was on faith almost. Whenever we would speak, when I say we, I talk about now the executive, and the executive of Trillian comprised of the CEOs of the various subsidiaries. So it was myself, Ms. Mathepu, Mr. Roy, my COO, for example. We would often meet and talk about what was happening in our respective subsidiaries. And we would raise concerns because Mckinsey would always say that, look, they're worried because the MSA is not signed. And I would also speak to the people in my company to say, what's the issue with the MSA? Why is the MSA not getting signed? And what's the issues with our contract with Mckinsey? And I would ask Mckinsey the same questions. And the reply that I would get specifically from Mr. Sagar and Dr. Weiss was that it will be signed imminently. And I believe them, and I understood or I accepted that it was on this basis that it would be signed imminently that they felt that they could carry on the work. So although these contracts were not signed and there wasn't anything formal, it didn't necessarily it didn't stop the momentum of trying to make progress towards the project.
Okay, well, to the extent that the contract was not in place, how did TMC feature in the services that McKinsey rendered to Eskom, pursuant to either the top engineers program or any of the work streams that you mentioned? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, Chair, I don't want to come across as though somebody who is just complaining. But I really do disagree with the perception that the McKinsey team, specifically what Dr. Fine and Dr. Weiss said at this commission. I can believe and I accept that the intention was to build junior companies, small to medium-sized companies, of which Trillian was perceived to be one, right? But the way that they went about doing it during my entire tenure and my relationship with Mckinsey was extensive. I met with them and spoke with them every single day for the time that I was there. They were not helpful at all. They were supposed to be the main contractor because they've got all the global experience, they've got the global network, they've done things like this before, and so forth. And they were supposed to be taking Trillian, this is the way I understood it, sorry. They were supposed to be taking Trillian under their arm and do the transfer of skills to build us up as well. Okay. In a management consulting company, you provide a service, and the only asset that you really have is people, right? People have the IP, people have the skills. You don't actually have anything else that is tangible. So the only way that Trillian could grow, in my opinion, was for us to put people to work alongside Mckinsey. Every single time I asked Mckinsey, and I met with them on all 4 work streams. Okay? Every single time they would show me an organogram of the team that would be executing any of the work, there was never a single Trillian representative. And my frustration was so heightened because I kept on saying, we would get people. My CRO and I were getting CVs of people. We had reached out to talent acquisition companies to start interviewing people and getting people on board. And every time we would interview, so we'd spend a lot of time interviewing people, we would then shortlist, and we would then go to Mckinsey to say, okay, here's a Trillian employee that's going to start on, call it the 1st of April, right? Mckinsey would say, nope, we're not accepting them, they're not good enough, we're looking for an MBA. No, we're not, and generation was the funniest thing. Mckinsey said to me that they were looking for somebody who had at least 25 years experience in coal-powered power stations, but had to be BEE compliant. Now, when you look at the history of this company, how are you going to find somebody that is non-white, that has got that kind of experience in the coal industry, that is also young and is willing to come on as an associate in a management consulting company? They made it impossible to work, and the attitude was, why are you even complaining? You're going to get paid anyway. That never made sense to me. So we had a very acrimonious relationship.
Yes. Did you report that situation to either Mr. Avery Wood, Mr. Salim Essa, or...
Yeah.
I think you said Mr. Mohammed Bilbert was also in your interview?
Yeah. I didn't have a relationship with Mr. Wood because I didn't come from regiments.
Okay.
Right? So during the period January to February, my contact was always with Mr. Angel. I only started, if you could call it, working with Mr. Wood slightly from the 1st of March. Although he did interview me, you're absolutely correct, but there was almost a hiatus in communication between January and February.
What was Mr. Clive Angel's position?
Mr. Clive Angel is the person that signed my employment contract, and my understanding was that he was the acting CEO of the holding group until Mr. Wood came on board.
Yes.
So you'll notice in my employment contract, I'm one of the only people that Salim Issa has actually signed an employment contract for, and Mr. Clive Angel. That was the first Trillian employee.
So you know Mr. Salim Issa?
Allah, he interviewed me, recall, I mentioned. And anyway, to answer your question, sorry, did I escalate my concern?
Yes.
Okay. In a roundabout way, I was trying to answer you. I did not escalate the concern to Mr. Bobat, nor did I escalate the concern to Mr. Wood, because I did not have an operational relationship with them. However, I did escalate the concern to Mr. Angel on a daily basis. I communicated it to Mr. Saga. I communicated it to one of the principals at Mckinsey, Mr. Lawrence Junkling, I think I'm saying his name correct. I escalated it to Mr. Issa, and I escalated it to Mr. I must get it right. Mr. Coco, or was it Mr. Machela? Mr. Coco.
Yeah, Machela Coco.
Mr. Coco, Mr. Machela Coco. And I escalated it to Mr. Coco. So yes, Mr. Coco, when he was here yesterday, referenced the emotional meeting that I had with him. And I mean, you can see how I'm even still getting angry now, although this was 4 years ago.
Yeah, he was here on Monday.
Sorry, forgive me. Yes. And it was that. I was telling him about the acrimonious relationship that we were having with Mckinsey, and was really seeing if there was some way that Trillian could just get some form of representation on these work streams. We couldn't get paid for not doing work. And although we didn't have the people to do the work at the time, we had 3 years to get people in work and to get experience. And we were trying to get people in chairs in front of computers starting the 1st of April. And every single time we would put forward any kind of views, whenever my COO and I put forward any kind of views in terms of the delivery approach, both in where we are experts, which is primary energy specifically, we were just dismissed.
Yeah, but I have seen in your affidavit your reference to individuals or experts taken from India and the United Arab Emirates who were used by Trillian to provide certain services.
Yes.
Can you go into that and
Can.
talk about it? Because you do say that Mckinsey was not pleased by that.
No. So the Emirati and Indian team come from a company called eGateway. And although also if you try to Google it, you wouldn't really find much about the organization, but what I understood about this specific company was that they had a representation or footprint in both Dubai and in India, and that they were experts in coal-fired power stations. So they fit really good from a technical perspective in the generation workstream. After I signed my employment contract, and it was in December 2015 when Mr. Angel started arranging all these meetings with Mckinsey, the one such meeting was with the generation workstream, in which there were representatives of both Mckinsey and eGateway. What I'd like to mention to the chair was that I didn't have any view of bringing eGateway on board. I was told that they are related to our shareholder and we will use them. That was there was no place for me to debate or discuss things, right?
And-
That's all that it was.
And who's the shareholder it was said they are related to?
Mr. Issa. Okay.
So who's telling you this?
Mr. Angel.
Mr. Angel is telling you eGateway is related to Mr. Essa.
Mr. Issa has an interest in eGateway. The words verbatim
Yes.
was what Mr. Angel told me.
And you say you were told that because you didn't have a view about engaging eGateway. You were told that they should be engaged.
They will be our subcontractor. Verbatim. They will be our subcontractor.
Yes. I'm interested in why you mentioned this. Is it because they had they lacked the qualification to do the work required?
Well, can I get there?
Yes, please.
Okay. So my first initial engagement with the Emirati and the Indian team was in Melrose Arch in Integrated Capital's office with both Mckinsey and eGateway. I was introduced to eGateway, and as I said to Mr. Seleka, I was told they will be your subcontractor. And this was in December of 2015, so we had started these engagements. If you just go forward a little bit in time, and now you put yourself in, let's call it the end of January, the beginning of February 2016, these teams had progressed. Mckinsey at the time were happy to have 2 individuals from eGateway on the generation team because they did have the engineering qualifications, they did have the experience. And so they were at the Majuba power station making this difference. The team was quite big. I think the team had about 20 people, of which there were only 2 representatives of Trillian. And those Trillian representatives were not employees, but rather two gentlemen of Indian descent, or Indian nationality rather, sorry, because they literally had to come in and go out back home. They were part of the team, so it wasn't even Trillian. So in the background, I'm in Joburg in Sandton, and I'm having these fights with Mckinsey saying we need to put people on board because nobody's learning or nobody's getting the skills acquired. And Mckinsey would say to me, but we're happy that you've got 2 people from, on the generation work stream. And I would argue with them saying, my issue is that goes against the fact that this needs to be a proudly South African business. We're actually not training anybody to get these skills from Trillian's side. My second issue is that it's specialist skills. If you're trying to start a management consulting company, you don't want specialist skills unless your intention is to specialize. And that was not Trillian Management Consulting's view. We wanted to stay general and generic management consulting. So the fact that Mckinsey would only use or utilize specialist skills that were not even South African, I found to be a huge contradiction. And then they would argue with me later and turn it around on me later to say, but you're not even complying with your requirements because all the people that you're putting on the teams and all the people being two, right, are not even South African. And this came out later. So this created a lot of contention amongst so many other issues that we would fight about.
So let's understand this. You mentioning eGateway as a subcontractor to Trillian, to TMC.
Yes.
And TMC is a subcontractor to McKinsey.
Yes.
And you are saying TMC was providing personnel from eGateway, which were not TMC's own employees.
Correct.
Was there a subcontract agreement between TMC and eGateway?
At the time in January, there wasn't. There was subsequently a subcontractors agreement that was signed. I signed it. It was signed between Trillian Management Consulting and eGateway. And the terms of that agreement, in my opinion, are completely ludicrous. They're ludicrous to the extent that eGateway would get 77% of everything that Trillian Management Consulting would earn on the generation workstream. Now, to me, that was an exorbitant amount of money for two people. It meant that their charge-out rate per hour was something close to like, I don't know, R500,000 per hour, considering how many hours they would have worked on at Majuba. But I signed that agreement.
Yes.
With a gentleman, I can't remember his name right now. Sorry, it was a long time ago. But I'm sure I've got the subcontractors agreement as a annexure. I'm sure it is. If it isn't, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, there's extensive amount of annexures there.
Yes.
But was McKinsey aware that you were subcontracting?
Yes.
Were they aware?
Yes, because these gentlemen, for example, when they started working, Majuba, the generation workstream started with Majuba Power Station. And it started very, very early in January 2016. So that the first working week of January, the entire team went to Majuba and worked there. So they were working on site. So they were staying in the same guest house. These individuals made it very clear that they were from India. They weren't from Trillian. They worked for eGateway. They didn't have email addresses at the time from Trillian. And I didn't hide it. There was nothing to hide. I was also very clear that they're a subcontractor because that's what I was told.
Okay. Any other subcontractor Trillian used?
Yes. Then there was another subcontractor. The other subcontractor was called Cutting Edge Commerce.
And in which workstream did they use Cutting Edge?
That was in the procurement workstream. And it was on a very similar sort of setup as eGateway. There was already an existing relationship, it seemed, because again, shortly after I signed my employment contract, Mr. Angel said to me, we will be working with them. Our shareholder has an interest in the company. I was introduced to two directors.
And the shareholder is again Mr. Salim.
Mr. Essa, yeah. I was introduced to two directors of Cutting Edge Commerce. One was Mr. Altaf Emily, and the other was Mr. Santosh Chobi. And they had already been working at Eskom. They were established at Eskom.
Are these South Africans?
Yes, that's a South African company. Mr. Chobi, whenever he would email me, however, his email address came from Sahara Computers. So I suspected a link to the Gupta family of businesses, organizations.
Was there a subcontract agreement between
I've never
TMC and
no, I
Cutting
did
Edge?
not sign a subcontractors agreement between TMC and Cutting Edge. I never started negotiations with one, and I've never seen one.
In the period that you were there at TMC, did Eskom make any payments in regard to the services under the envisaged MSA?
I wouldn't even know. So at the time, I wouldn't have known because I asked Mr. Angel again, Chairman, if you just keep in mind that my reference frame is large organizations like Anglo-American, and I understand how those type of organizations work and are structured. I expected as the CEO of the subsidiary TMC that I would have sight to the financials of the business. I would assume that one of my KPIs would be the financial health of the subsidiary, as is reasonable for a CEO. And when I asked Mr. Angel this, and I said, okay, so when do I get access to the bank accounts and when do I get access to managing how money's coming in and going out? He says, no, that will never happen. All the financial aspects of Trillian will be managed centrally at the holding company. So the executive management, so all the CEOs and COOs will do nothing when it comes to finances. And I thought that was very bizarre because I wondered then, well, how will you manage my performance? How will you know that I'm actually doing a good job or not? You know, so no, to answer your question, during my tenure, I had absolutely no idea if any amounts had been paid or I knew about the one invoice being issued, which I'm sure we'll speak about later. But I didn't know anything about any money coming in. I was concerned it was on the 16th of March, 2016. And I remember going to the CFO, who was Mr. Tebogo Lebolo, the CFO of the holding company, TCP.
Tebogo Leballo.
Excuse me?
Is it Tebogo Leballo?
Yes, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Tebogo Lebalo.
Yes.
Yes. I remember going to him and asking him, it's like, because the regiment's team had come on board. And I knew that suddenly our cost base had increased. Now we had to pay salaries for quite a few more people when prior to them coming on board, it was only Ben and I, Mr. Bernard and I, that we were paying salaries for. And I remember going to Mr. Lebolo asking him, how are we going to pay for things if the MSA is not signed? Because if the MSA is not signed, we're not getting money in. And I remember even asking Mr. Angel, and Mr. Angel said to me that it doesn't matter because we've got shareholder capital investments, as you do in a startup, so it didn't seem unreasonable. But without having sight of how much money the shareholder was prepared to put into the company, I didn't know how long this business would actually be able to sustain itself. So I had no sight of any money coming into the business during my tenure, Mr. Seleka. I've later come to find out when I was working with Mr. Budlender on his investigations into Trillian, so that was in 2017, I found out for the first time that Trillian was in fact paid. I think it was after my departure though.
There were payments in August 2016, December 2016, and February 2017.
But I came to know that later.
So you had already left by that time?
I beg your pardon?
You had already left by
Yes,
that
correct.
time. The date you gave when you make inquiries about how we're going to pay the employees because the MSA is not yet signed, did you say 16 March 2016?
Correct. It was a Wednesday.
What were you told about Mr. Salim Essa
What?
at the beginning of your employment at Trillian?
About the company?
About him personally, his role, because you've been mentioning he's the majority shareholder.
Yes.
Yeah. What role were you told he's going to play in the group?
Okay. Mr. Salim Essa didn't tell me much about himself when I met with him.
Yes.
But I understood Mr. Salim Essa's role rather through Mr. Angel.
Okay,
Can I
tell the
explain
chairperson.
that? Okay. Mr. Angel, this is really interesting. So I had mentioned, Chair, that Mr. Angel and I had met a few times before I signed my employment contract. And obviously, once I accepted the offer, we were in a lot more constant contact. And when Mr. Essa, it was before I had committed to joining Trillian, I do recall asking Mr. Angel, how is it possible that Trillian could secure work at Eskom. And the reason why I asked that question is because coming from just having experience, a little bit of experience in the management consulting side of things, I just know that working within the public sector is very difficult. It's very difficult to secure work within the public sector, and probably more difficult to secure work in the public sector if the company doesn't have a history to prove that it's delivered as such. And that would have been Trillian, because Trillian was just starting. And Mr. Angel specifically said to me that you need people with relationships. And our major shareholder, Mr. Essa, is one of those people with those relationships. His words to me exactly were, you need people to open the taps, is the phrasing that he used. And our shareholder can open the taps. In subsequent conversations, and I don't remember the exact dates, I also remember asking Mr. Angel things like, what is the long-term plan of Trillian? Was the intention, because they integrated capital management spoke as themselves as an IPO, an initial public offering. So typically in this industry, if people are setting up an IPO, you're setting up a company to list on the stock exchange, ultimately. So I'd asked Mr. Angel this, is that the intention with Trillian? And he replied to me and he says he's not sure because Trillian's lifespan is envisaged only for the current dispensation, is what he had said to me at the time. So in my mind, Trillian was only going to be working for about 3 years, or that was only the plan for 3 years, and after that people would figure out what's going to happen with it later.
Oh, so the current dispensation, you understood it to be
Yes.
a period of 3 years?
Because that was 2016.
Yes.
I understood it to be like a political affiliation with our current president. And the next election was going to happen.
Just face the chairperson. What did you understand it?
I understood that it was a current dispensation, meaning the political party or the ruling party or the president,
Who was the president at the time?
Mr. Jacob Zuma. And the next general election would have been held at that time. It was either 2019 or 2020. It was going to be the next general election.
Yeah, I wouldn't recall offhand.
Sorry?
I wouldn't recall offhand. So
Yeah.
let me,
Well, there was to be a local government election in 2016. There was a general election in 2014, and there was another general election in 2019.
Yeah. So, and this was said to me in 2016.
yeah.
So the current dispensation would have been about 3 years, because the next election was scheduled for 2019, as you say.
So
Well, of course, there was going to be an internal ANC election in December 2017. The ANC was going to be having an elective conference in December 2017, at which elections would take place for its leaders.
Okay.
So which one were you talking about?
I personally understood it to be the general election where we could get a new president. I don't follow politics, so I didn't even know about the 2017. But my personal understanding, when Mr. Angel said the current dispensation, I assumed the time period from that point to be until the next general election. That's what I understood.
Yeah.
So please forgive my naivety in terms of politics.
Okay, all right.
no, that's fine. Because I think when the Eskom board members were appointed in 2014, December 2014, they were appointed on a 3-year term. I know some of them left in 2017. Okay, you were told that about Mr. Salim Essa.
Yeah, does that answer the question correctly? I mean, well, appropriately, that's all I can tell you, unfortunately.
Yes, no,
Okay.
that's all right. What you know, which is what you were told, and then Mr. Angel told you about. Just repeat the words. You say Trillian is what for the dispensation?
Trillian, because I asked him about the future plans.
Yes.
Right, and he just says, What we know is that we've secured work for the current dispensation.
Oh, you've got secured work for the current dispensation.
And when you look at the cash flows for the top engineer program, they were for 3 years.
Yeah, can you take the chairperson to that, please?
Oh, okay. Just give me a second.
That is on page 450.
Sorry, 415 or 450?
450, yes.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Miss.
Of Eskom Bundle 14,
So
chairperson.
I've got the table in front of me. I'll just wait for the chairman to get it.
Yes. Wait.
Okay. So, Chairman, what you see in that table on that page is,
The table is on page 451.
I'm talking about, but I'm only referencing the table now. Is that
No,
okay?
I'm just placing on record
Sorry.
the right page for the table.
Sorry.
You may proceed.
The first column of that table, you can see in the top corner it says top engineer, right? And in that entire column, it gives you a whole bunch of different work programs and work streams, and I'm going to explain them to you now shortly. Okay? Some of them are different from what I've spoken about, but I'm going to put that in context for you.
Just before you do that, Chair, I see we are 5 minutes into your tea time.
Okay, let's take the tea break. We'll resume at 25 to 12.
Thank you.
We adjourn. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, DCJ. Chairperson. Just before we proceed, Chair, I have been able to get the assistant to update the bundle with Ms. Goodson's supplementary affidavit,
Yes.
which is in Eskom bundle 14 bracket B, page 566.1. I would just like Ms. Matipu to confirm it so that we can admit it as an exhibit. Ms.
Okay.
Goodson. Did I say Ms. Matipu?
Did
Are you
hear
there,
the
Ms.
page
Goodson?
number? Did you
Page
hear the page number?
Sorry?
566.1.
5, 6.
She will help you. She will help you.
Yeah.
Is that the one?
Thank you, Mr. Selega. I've
Yeah.
got it.
That page, Ms. Goodson, you are also there, page 566.1.
Yes.
It's an affidavit. Well, between tram lines says statement, but it is on the last page commissioned by
Correct.
Commissioner of Oath. The last page is page 566.5.
Yes,
Are you there?
yes,
And there is a signature there. You confirm that to be your signature.
yes, I do.
The affidavit is dated 19 February 2021. You confirm this to be your affidavit
Yes,
and confirm the contents thereof.
absolutely.
Chairperson, I beg leave to have it admitted as Exhibit U 31.2.
The statement of Ms. Bianca Goodson, starting at page 566.1, as Bundle 14, is admitted together with its annexures and will be marked as Exhibit U 31.2.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ms. Goodson, just before the adjournment,
Do
you were
you
about
want me to put this file away for now, or?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So we must go back to the file we were dealing with before the adjournment. That's EB, Eskom Bundle 14, bracket A, page.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Goodson, you were about to take the chairperson through the forecast cash flows, and which is the table on page 451. And I think as you do that, please give the chairperson the context. Where does this table come from? Who gave it to you? For what reason? And what does the table show?
Okay. So, Chairman, if you look at the table and you look at the first column, you'll see at the top, in the top left-hand side, it says top engineer, under which it's got PMO, GX design, and so forth. All those in that column are different sub-work streams, which I'll explain each shortly. And then you have two more columns with numbers in them. The first is dated the 17th of December 2015, and it's a forecast. And then there's another that is the 18th of November 2015, which is a forecast. Okay? I'd like to just give you the context of where those numbers come from. So the column that talks to November, which is the rightmost column, was an email that I received from Mr. Clive Angel. Mr. Clive Angel had forwarded an email to me. The original email, when you look at the thread, the original authors of the email was Mr. Vikas Sagar, And attached to this email was an Excel spreadsheet. And in the Excel spreadsheet were those different work streams, so to say, that you see on the left-hand mouse column.
You said the original author or the person from whom the email originated from was Mr. Sagar.
Correct.
He was from Mckinsey.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So Mr. Sagar sends the email to Mr. Angel. Mr. Angel then sends the email to me. Okay. There's an Excel worksheet in there, and I've extracted the numbers from that Excel worksheet into the column on the right-hand side. The way that you read the numbers is that where the number is positive, so for example, you see top engineer 341, that is actually a cost that Mckinsey has to invest. Okay? Wherever the number is negative, it's actually a revenue. So if you go to the bottom and you look at total cash flow, the second row from the bottom, and you look in the column for November 2015, you see that the number there is minus 10,311. But that number is actually...
I'm sorry. Let me try and... Yes, I can see that,
okay.
yeah.
That number is actually in millions. So that number is actually 10 billion and 300 million. Okay?
Hang on 1 second. Did you say it represented McKinsey's or Trillian's
This was the
cost?
This was
the positive
combined.
one.
The
Whose cost?
The combined team that is doing the work. So this would be Mckinsey, and I'm assuming also with supplier development partner jointly.
Oh, okay.
So that's why, Chairman, you will see in the top engineer line item is actually an investment.
Just hang on 1 second. Yes, okay.
Okay.
You can continue, yeah.
So before I start explaining what this table represents, would you mind if I take you through what the different work streams are on the left-hand side?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So the top engineer, in the context of this table, is the way that you first described it to me when you were asking a clarification question about engineers. So the top engineer there talks to Mckinsey's investment, or Mckinsey and its partners' investment into Eskom employees to make them top engineers. And that investment in both scenarios, both the December forecast as well as the November forecast, is an investment of 341 million.
Why is there any significance to the fact that the earlier month, namely November 2015, is put at the end, and the later month, namely December 2015, is put before? Is it an accounting thing or what?
The reason why I did that, Mr. Chairman, is because I wanted to show you the one first that was most prevailing. So the one that was the last and most significant one that I've seen is actually the middle column. So there isn't any
significance. Okay,
and that's
okay, all
December.
right. Yeah, okay,
Right.
continue.
So obviously I assume that December supersedes November in terms of the forecast, and you'll see that those numbers are slightly different by about 1 billion. Okay. But the top engineer program was an investment from Mckinsey's and its partner side into Eskom, and that's why it's a positive number. because they've got to expend the money. The next line is PMO, and what that stands for is Project Management Office. So it's an overhead of the entire structure that has to oversee this entire program. So again, that's not revenue generating, it's actually an expense, and that's why you see Mckinsey forecasting that expense has been 320 million. Okay? The next two lines that you see is GX, design and scale, and then GX rollout. Okay? Those two together make the generation work stream that I spoke to you about earlier, that forms part of the top engineers MSA. So those two together are generation.
So GX stands for generation.
Correct.
I see the scribe is above the table.
Correct. Okay. What this table tells you is that in December, the authors of the spreadsheet, which was Mckinsey, anticipated at least 3 billion rand as revenue from the generation work streams together.
That's the two figures added together.
Yes, so if you take the 1537 and you add it to 1537, I'm rounding it and I'm calling it 3 billion. But it's a little bit more than 3 billion. Okay? And you see that that number stays more or less the same in November as well.
Okay.
Okay? If we go to the next line item, which is procurement, I explained the procurement work stream to you earlier, and Mckinsey had envisaged that it and its partners would accrue a revenue of 1.6 billion for procurement.
What were they talking about when they were saying they would make that kind of money under procurement? Did they mean that? That's the tenders that they would get from Eskom?
No. The way that this contract was structured was that Mckinsey and its partners would only ever get paid. It was referred to as an at-risk contract. So when you looked at the draft versions of this MSA, you know, in all your contracts, you always get an amount for what's it going to cost you to get the service. The amount for this specific contract was always zero. Because the explanation was that Eskom would never spend money on the consultants. The consultants would only get paid out of the savings that they realize. So the way you read this, under the procurement one, for example, is that Mckinsey had anticipated that out of all the savings that they would have got for Eskom, they would be deserving of, or they would accrue 1.6 billion of that saving as fees. That's how you read that.
Okay.
Well, this entire table.
Okay.
PED is primary energy. And I explained that was one of the work streams in top engineers. And for primary energy, Mckinsey and his partners had planned to get 1.6 billion in revenue. And then finally, you have claims. And I mentioned that to you. And that in that instance, Mckinsey felt that they could earn 710 million. So I've explained to you now the 4 work streams that I told you I understood as part of the top engineers. I've explained generation, I've explained procurement, I've explained primary energy, and I've explained claims. So when I looked at this worksheet, those are the only ones that I knew constituted the top engineers program. Okay? However, Mckinsey clearly were planning other work that I didn't know about. Okay? And now we start looking at the lines that start by new build. I have no idea what that is. But clearly Mckinsey at some point in November thought that they would get 1.5 billion for that. There was financing and funding. I don't know anything about that. There was the corporate plan. I didn't know anything about that. There was fixed finance strategy. I didn't know anything about that. And then clearly they were planning to do something with nuclear power for 300 million. When you add all of those up and you take away the expenses, you're looking at the net cash flow line, which shows you that the net cash flow for Mckinsey and his partners would have been, I'm rounding it up, would have been roughly 10 billion rand that they would accrue through all this work. And that was the plan. And this work, and as part of my annexures, is cash flowed. So you can actually see it as a sequence of time. And you can see that this money would be accrued over 3 years, starting in 1 January 2016.
So what are these projections?
Projections forecast, yes. And I recall when I mentioned earlier that when I was having difficulties with my relationship with Mckinsey, I had escalated the concerns to Mr. Issa.
Yes.
And I recall Mr. Issa saying to me, who do these guys think they are? We'll replace them because I'm getting my 5 billion. Now the 5 billion is 50%
I'm sorry,
of
just repeat that sentence.
Yes.
Okay. I mentioned
You
earlier.
recall something? That's what I want to hear.
You recall that I mentioned that I escalated the acrimonious relationship with Mckinsey to a few people, one of them being Mr. Issa.
And that acrimonious relationship, I wanted to ask you earlier, was between yourself and Mckinsey, or with TMC or Trillian with Mckinsey?
Well, I
both.
was TMC.
Yes.
We had no other employees.
Yes, so, but what you mean is it wasn't personal.
No,
was-
it was business. It was just trying.
because of who you represented.
Absolutely. It was
Okay.
completely professional.
Okay.
And I mentioned earlier that I escalated that acrimony to Mr. Issa. And in that meeting with Mr. Issa says, well, if Mckinsey don't play ball, we'll replace them. I still want my 5 billion. Now 5 billion,
They would replace them and?
I still want my 5 billion.
Yeah.
So 5 billion is half of the 10
It's half
billion.
of the 10 billion.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's just go back to table 1, forecast cash flows. That table, did you say was based on the email you received from Mr. Angel, who had received it from Mr.
Saga. Mr. Saga from Mckinsey.
Saka? Yes, okay.
That was that's November. And then on the
Yes.
17th of December, I received an update.
Oh,
And that's the
so
middle
you
column.
received 2?
Yes, correct.
Okay, all right. But do you by any chance still have the document that you received?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's part
Is
of
it
mine.
here by any chance?
Part of my annexures, for sure.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. But these are the figures,
Yeah.
these figures you took from that document.
And if for some reason it's not attached, just let me know, I'll give it to you.
Yeah,
I've still got
okay, okay. Okay, so do you have any understanding as to why revenue was reflected under negative?
No, it's so uncommon, because usually your revenue is positive and your expenses are negative.
Yeah, or,
It's
or
very
was
uncommon.
it a way of hiding what it represented?
Gee, you're asking me to speculate
You
on
don't
that.
know.
I don't know.
No, if you don't know, you don't know. But it's, yeah, okay, you may continue.
Yeah. Ms. Goodson, I'm reminded of Ms. Motepu's evidence about an email that came from her, that came from Mr. Eric Wood, Dr. Eric Wood to her, with also a table of cash flow projections. I'm wondering whether could this be, are you aware of that exchange between the two of them?
No, and I followed Ms. Mathepu's evidence in the parliamentary inquiry and here so closely that it's actually, no, it's the first time that you're mentioning it to me, but I'd gladly take a look.
No, she mentioned it here
Okay.
when she was here.
I don't know. I've never conducted an exercise to compare if they're the same or different. But I'll happily do it if you want me to.
No, that's fine. You will get the reference to that.
Okay.
When do you say Did you receive that email that came from Mr. Eric? Was it Mr. Eric Wood?
Angel.
From Mr. Angel. So it came from Mr. Sago, to Angel. Mr. Angel then forwarded to you. When was that?
As the dates are shown in the top of the column. The second one was the 17th of December, and then the first one was on the 18th of November.
Oh, those are the days when you received the communique.
Yes.
Oh, I see. So you created this table yourself?
Yes, I did, because
Okay.
they weren't in exactly the same format, but for the sake of this affidavit.
Yes. Okay. But the information obviously comes from that email which was sent to you.
Correct.
But then you left too soon before this money could be made.
Absolutely. I thought this is so ambitious.
You
This
thought what?
is so ambitious. This can be the GDP of a small country. I didn't think that this was actually achievable in 3 years.
Oh,
I've never seen cash flows like this. And remember, I come from mining, right? Anglo-American has huge cash flows. This was for consulting. This was shocking, to say the least.
What was the reason why the information was sent to you?
I don't even know why. I think Mr. Angel just sent it to me. I don't even think I requested it because I didn't know it existed. So Mr. Sago sent it to Mr. Angel. Mr. Angel would very often do that. He would literally just click forward without giving me explanations or comments, and he would just send me things. And I think that was the case with these as well. If I recall correctly, there was no even, from Clive to me, there wasn't even any text in the email. It was just forwarded to me.
What did you do with it?
I looked at it and I thought it was ridiculous. I don't know of any startup company. When I put my Trillian hat on, and I don't think about Mckinsey, because I know Mckinsey earns a lot more money than startup companies. As a startup company, Trillian making this kind of money in 3 years is bewildering. Right?
So the forecast was over 3 years.
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, Trillian was a few months old.
Yes, and Trillian only had me employed at this time, on these days. And I
you-
knew that I can't do work for 5 billion.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you hadn't even officially started your employment.
I was still working for Anglo-American on these days.
Okay. Could it be that this was used, well, now looking at the timing of it, it was used to entice you to come into the company?
No, because this was only shared with me after I signed
After
my
you'd already
employment
signed.
contract. I think you reminded me that I signed my employment contract
On the
a day
17th.
before the 17th.
I see.
Yeah.
So you said you received this email which had these figures when?
The
More or
one is on
less.
the 18th of November, and the other one is on the 17th of December.
Or on those dates on those columns are the dates of receipt
Correct.
of the email.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, it's even the date of the Excel spreadsheet that's attached to it.
Okay. They are not the dates when the forecast was made by whoever made the forecast.
I assume both are true. It's the date that I received it, and it's the date that the forecast was made. I believe both are true.
Okay.
So these are two companies exchanging information about cash flow projections in respect of work that they are busy negotiating to get at Eskom. Or is it work, or some of it, top engineers? You said they had already started in December?
That's the thing. Mckinsey looked as though they had started working. Just to come to your first question, you said that we were negotiating this together. Trillian was not part of these negotiations at all. Right, so Mckinsey was negotiating this. And that's why I was the recipient of the information, not concluded as, or not included as somebody to add or supplement the information. I was just giving it. Right, so all the work that was happening in the background, I really got the impression that it was specifically between Eskom and Mckinsey, And Trillian, as the ST partner, was just informed. Sort of like baggage on the side.
Did you know about regiments?
I knew that regiments had existed, because when I met Mr. Eric Wood and Mr. Bobat in my interview,
Just face to the chairperson.
sorry, forgive me, sorry. I knew that regiments existed, and I knew that that Mr. Wood was going to be leaving in March of the following year. I didn't know anything else about regiments at the time. Again, you Google and you can read the website, but I've never ever heard them. I never heard of them before that one time.
But I'm asking specifically in this period, November 2015, December 2015, did you know that there was a company called Regiment in existence?
Yes, I did, because Mr. Eric Wood and Mr. Bobat had interviewed me in about November, before I signed my contract. And that was my first introduction or ever mention of the words regiments. That's all that I knew of them.
You were interviewed by Mr. Eric Wood and Mr. Mohammed Bobat. Did you say it was in October?
The initial conversation started in around about September, October, and I think the interview was also probably in about October, could have been.
You have explained what Mr. Eric Wood's position was, Mr. Clive Angel's position was, but what was the position of Mr. Mohammed Bobat?
This is interesting. There's some information that I found out in Ms. Mathepu's evidence to you, Chair. But also what Ms. Mathepu said to you, I was also told by Mr. Angel, right? So what I was told, Clive had told me that I would be meeting Mr. Wood at this interview. He didn't tell me prior that I'd be meeting Mr. Bobat. So I was a bit surprised that when I walked into the room, there were two gentlemen there. So after having this interview with him, I asked Clive, who was Mr. Bobat and why did he have to interview me? And Mr. Angel said to me, the reason why Mr. Bobat interviewed you is because he would have taken the job. So he was originally earmarked for the CEO of TMC. And if I recall correctly, Ms. Mathepu mentioned the same in her evidence. And that's what she had heard from the regiment side. Right? So then I asked Mr. Angel, I was like, okay, so then why is he not taking it? Why are you guys looking at me? And Mr. Angel said, because he's got a better opportunity. And when people have said that to me before, I've got a better opportunity, it almost implies that you're leaving the company or the organization and you're going somewhere else. So I assumed that, and that maybe he was leaving on decent terms and he just wanted to make sure that he was leaving Eric with somebody that he trusted, and that's why he was seeing me in the interview. That's what I assumed. But on the 8th of December 2015, Mr. Angel called me, and Mr. Angel said to me, do you remember I told you that Mr. Bobat has got better things? I said, yes. He says, have you seen the headlines? And I think it's the 8th, it could be the 9th of December. And I had seen the headlines, and the headlines were that Mr. Bobat was joining Mr. Van Rooyen at Treasury. And that was his promotion. And Mr. Angel said to me, see, our boss, who's Mr. Issa, not encourages, but that wasn't the word, he promotes loyalty.
He what?
Promotes loyalty.
He promotes loyalty.
So the way that I interpreted that was that Mr. Bobat must have been quite loyal in some way to my boss, which was Mr. Issa, and for that he became a special advisor to Mr. Van Rooyen when Mr. Van Rooyen went to Treasury. But Mr. Angel did explicitly tell me that Mr. Bobat was actually supposed to have my job. That was the original plan.
And the date you gave, is it 9 December
It's
20?
the 8th or the 9th. It's one of those two. It's in my affidavit.
Yeah, but 2015.
Yes.
What did you say the headlines were saying?
That is when the news broke that Mr. Van Rooyen would be the new finance minister. And the headlines very shortly after that was, no, I think Mr. Angel told me that he was coming, but the headline shortly after that was about Mr. Van Rooyen's advisors and that he came with Mr. Whitley. It was something along those lines, Chairman. I stand to be corrected on the exact dates, but I do know Mr. Angel told me that Mr. Bobat was with Mr. Van Rooyen at Treasury. And I think the media picked up on the advisors possibly a little bit later. I don't remember exactly the dates. It was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm sure it's in my affidavit, the exact date.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You say the 8th or the 9th of December 2015. You were explaining that you thought when they say he's what? He's getting a better position?
Promoted, yeah. Well, I'm sorry, what I said verbatim was that he's got better options, or he's got a better
option.
opportunity.
Yeah. That you thought that he would be leaving the company.
Yes.
Why did you say you thought? Is it because he still remained at TMC?
No, because usually that's what you'd say. Like when I resigned from Anglo, for example.
Yes.
And people would ask, but why is Bianca resigning? My manager would say she's got a better opportunity, implying that I'm moving somewhere else.
Yes. For greener pastures.
So to say.
When Ms. Musilo was here, she testified about the appointment of Mr. Bobat as the special advisor to Minister Van Rooyen.
Are you referring to Ms. Mutepu?
Ms. Mutepu.
Yes.
Yes.
Just that the record will, whoever reads the record will think it's somebody else, because I think you mentioned her name rather than surname, I think.
Yes.
Or did I misunderstand? Yeah, so somebody reading the transcript will think you talk about somebody else and will say, who is this now?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Ms. Mutepu testified about this appointment, but she also said there was a purpose behind that appointment. Now, I'm not going to tell you that purpose. Did you know of any purpose behind Mr. Bobat's appointment as a special advisor to the minister?
At the time, what I
Yes.
knew or what I know now?
At the time.
At the time. It was mentioned to me. I'm just trying to make sure that I get the dates correctly for you. No, not in Treasury. Once Mr. Bobat had moved to Cocta, Mr. Angel was very explicit that we would be getting opportunities there, but not in the time with Treasury.
Okay.
No, which was only a few days. But the following year, when I started, so in January 2016, there was a lot of movement, and Trillian Management Consulting was invited to present to Minister Van Rooyen, for example, and Mr. Bobat facilitated that. So there was quite a bit of connection. But please forgive me, I didn't plan on discussing that here, knowing that this is the Eskom-Workstream, but I'm happy to discuss it.
Yes, no, I've seen it in your affidavit.
Okay.
It's already there.
Yes.
So you have no chance, unfortunately. You've talked about the events of December 2015. The appointment of Minister Van Rooyen as the Minister of Finance. Mr. Bobat gets to be appointed as a special advisor to him, but that gets to be short-lived. Now you are in 2016, and you're taking us to their move from Treasury to Cocta. Is that right?
Yes.
Then tell the chairperson about this meeting you're talking about, and who arranges the
wow.
meeting.
Okay. Can I go into quite a bit of detail about this?
Well, let's see.
Okay. Again, Chairman, please forgive me for not getting the exact dates, but I know that in my affidavit they are very explicit, and they're supported by meeting requests and emails. It was sometime in January, and I refer to it in my affidavit as a road show,
Yeah,
being tongue-in-cheek.
I can help you with the page number.
Okay?
Page 457. 457. I see you have dates there.
Yes.
the first week in January 2016, 8 January 2016.
Yes, correct. On the 8th of January, Chair, I get a call from Mr. Wood. Now, Mr. Wood is still at regiments. I had just started working at Trillian, like that week was my first day, so to say. And Mr. Wood asked me to come through to the regiment's offices. And I go, I'm quite compliant. And when I get to the regiment's offices, he introduces me to two directors from a company called Oliver Wyman. And specifically, these directors are directors of Oliver Wyman, but not Oliver Wyman South Africa, Oliver Wyman Dubai. And Mr. Wood says to me, we're going on a road show. And I was, okay, so what do we need to do? So there's only 4 of us in that meeting. It's myself, Mr. Wood, and these 2 directors from Oliver Wyman. And that night, that evening, Mr. Wood had arranged for us to have dinner at Wombles in Parkhurst or Parktown North or something, with Mr. Gary Peter in his capacity as the CFO of Transnet at the time. We have dinner, and that was quite a surprise for me. I didn't quite expect it. And we have dinner at Wombles, and the discussion over dinner with the Oliver Wyman directors was, is there opportunity for Oliver Wyman to work at Transnet, where Trillian would be the supply development partner? So the dinner concluded. The next day...
Yeah, but you can't conclude like that. What's the response?
Oh, no, I just going to tell you everything, and then I'm going to tell you, but the roadshow is really cool.
No, it took us to the dinner table. You tell us what was being discussed. You say they posed the question, are there business opportunities for us at Transnet, and then you don't tell us what the response from Mr. Gary Peter was.
Sorry, because the point I'm trying to make is more about the roadshow, but absolutely, I will tell you what Mr. Gary Peter said. Mr. Gary Peter said that he assumed that there were opportunities within Transnet engineering. And I don't recall the rest of the details of that dinner. This was a long time ago, and it's not one of those meetings where you take notes. It was a dinner. But Mr. Peter replied in the affirmative. I think that's what you're looking for. Okay? The next morning, the roadshow continued, and Mr. Wood asked me to collect...
Now, this roadshow, was that a program in terms of which you were going to meet with potential clients? What's the connection between a roadshow and what you were doing?
It's what I call it now after the event. I was quite in the dark. I didn't anticipate the dinner with Mr. Gary Peter until I got the meeting invite from Mr. Wood's PA. And then I just got the meeting invite that we're meeting Mr. Singh the next day. And in that same afternoon, we were meeting the minister. I woke up in the morning expecting a normal day, just going to the office, Chair. So in hindsight, when I wrote the affidavit, I referred to it as a roadshow. But it wasn't...
you gave it the term roadshow.
I gave it the term roadshow.
Okay.
Sorry.
But why did you give the term roadshow?
Because in 2 days, we met really interesting people. We met the CFO of Transnet, the CFO of Eskom, and the Minister of COCTA in the space of 2 days.
Okay, all right, okay.
And all that we're doing is taking these directors around to meet all these influential people, and I felt like a glorified driver.
Why did you feel like that?
Because, sorry, can I go again chronologically now? So it's the morning after the dinner.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the morning after the dinner. Mr. Wood asked me to collect the Oliver Wyman directors from their hotel. And it may be too much information, but I distinctly remember how embarrassing this was because the hotel was next to my daughter's school and my daughter had thrown up in the car. So now you've got these directors of this company in your car. You've got to drive to Megawatt Park from sort of the Saxonwold area, Sandhurst area. In your car, it's very uncomfortable to be inside of it, and you're on your way to go meet the CFO of Eskom. And I just remember feeling so embarrassed, and I had just met these gentlemen the day before. I didn't know what to talk to them about. I didn't know what to tell them about Trillian. Trillian, for all intents and purposes, was only 8 days old. You know, I mean, what was I expected to say and do for a company that is so huge and has a global footprint like Oliver Wyman? Anyway, you know, people say fake it till you make it, so I try to put in a smile, I try to act professional, I try to come across as though I knew what I was doing, and I went to these meetings. And then that morning we met, the two Oliver Wyman directors and myself, met Mr. Wood at Megawatt Park, and we were escorted to the executive wing in a boardroom where we were introduced to Mr. Anuj Singh. And it was very similar to the dinner. Mr. Wood introduced who everybody was, and the directors from Oliver Wyman were very forthcoming, saying that we would like to work with Eskom. We think Eskom's got great opportunities, and these are the things that they are thinking could help Eskom. And they proposed 2 work streams. The one was a change management type of management consulting type work, and the other one was associated with the nuclear program. And Mr. Singh was very much in the affirmative, very much like Mr. Peter. Mr. Singh was saying, okay, fine, get me a proposal, send it to me, let's see what happens after this. So the meetings were very short, they were very introductory, so at most they were like 45 minutes. You know, there was no planned agenda, there was no presentations, there was nothing like that. Later on that afternoon, Mr. Wood had arranged a meeting with Mr. van Rooyen. And so in between those 2 meetings, we had nothing to do. So the directors of Oliver Wyman and myself went to regiment's offices. And while we were there, we were communicating with Mr. Bobet, and Mr. Bobet was telling us things like, how do you refer to it? Sort of like the proceedings, right? You know, don't speak to the minister first, the minister must sit down first. You know, just the general sort of, this is how you refer to a minister and so forth, things that I didn't really know. So I appreciated getting the feedback. Mr. Bobet then sent me an email telling me that I've got to put together a business prospectus or business profile for Trillian, which knocked me off my feet because this company was only, like, as I said, 9 days old, and now I've got to put together this business proposal. So I'm sitting
You
in
had to say you were the only employee.
Yes. This is like a shock for me, right? So we're sitting in this boardroom with the Oliver Wyman directors. It's easy for them to come up with a business profile because they've got all these marketing teams to help them. They've got these amazing slides and presentations. Here I'm starting for the first time trying to put something together. And anyway, the long and the short, we eventually go to the minister in Pretoria. So we go and we meet the minister.
At Cocta.
Of Cocta. So Minister van Rooyen, and at that time, he was the Minister of Cocta.
At that stage, what was your understanding of the purpose, why you needed to meet the minister or the scope?
Based on the dinner the previous night and the meeting with Mr. Singh in the morning, it became very clear to me that this was, the roadshow is a good name to actually give this experience because it was introducing these entities of these South African people to the Oliver Wyman directors as Trillian being the facilitator trying to get work. That was very obvious to me.
Okay, that's what was obvious to you. Did nobody ever say what the purpose was?
No. Mr. Wood would just introduce us, and it was as though we were expected. Mr. Peter and Mr. Singh, for example, didn't look surprised, like, oh my gosh, you weren't in my diary, who are you, why am I meeting you? There was no sense of that at all.
Okay, all right.
So we met the minister, and we presented our...
Who was the minister with?
Mr. Whitley and Mr. Bobet.
Oh, okay. Was the DG not there?
No. It was the 4 of us being myself, Mr. Wood, and the 2 Oliver Wyman directors sitting on the one side. And on the other side was Mr. Whitley, Mr. Bobet, and Mr. van Rooyen. That's all that was in the meeting.
Obvious. Of course, Mr. Bobet was well known to...
I'd met him before. Well, not well known, I'd met him before.
I mean, was well known to Trillian.
Yes. I'd never met Mr. Whitley before.
Yeah. You say you had never?
Never met, that was the first time that I'd ever met Mr. Whitley.
Okay. All right, continue.
And what's the
Sorry, can you spell that name?
Whitley?
Yeah,
Whiteley.
okay. So
So
he's
he
an
was one of the two
advisor.
persons who were appointed to, one was the chief of staff for Minister van Rooyen when he was appointed as Minister of Finance, and the other was an advisor. I keep on forgetting which one
Okay.
was what.
The special advisor is Mohammed Bobat.
Mohammed Bobat and Mr. Whitley.
Yes.
I see in my affidavit, I spell it Whitley.
On that same page.
Yes, so if you look at paragraph 60 in my affidavit,
Paragraph?
60 of my affidavit, on page 457,
Yes.
I
yes.
spell Whitley.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
continue. So the meeting starts and what happens?
We present our presentations. So the Oliver Wyman directors had their own business profile presentation, and then I must be honest with you, Chair, a really embarrassing presentation because I only had a few hours to put it together. I didn't even know what this company was going to do.
But you didn't need much time.
Didn't have time. We don't even have employees. I can't even say what we're good at because we didn't even exist.
You put it as if you are complaining that you were not given enough time. You didn't need enough time.
Apparently.
You could have put it together with your eyes closed.
But that's the thing, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make to you, is that as much as I'll be in my professional career, if I had gotten fired for that piece of work, I would believe my employer was justified. But when we left that meeting, we received so much praise. And subsequent to these meetings or subsequent to these road shows,
You mean on the basis of the presentation you made, you received so much praise?
100%. And like I said, it's probably one of the poorest pieces of work that I've ever made.
So who was praising you? Mr. Mohammed Bobat?
Yeah, no, Mr. Van Rooyen.
The minister?
Yes.
Well, don't leave the meeting as yet.
Okay.
The presentation of the other people that you were with, what was its gist? Were they just telling the minister what they do
Yes.
as a company and how good they were,
Yes.
and the track record they
Yes.
had,
Absolutely.
but aimed at getting what kind of work, as you understood the position?
The minister told us what kind of work we could propose for. So the minister told us what kind of work we could propose for.
Oh,
So the minister suggested that we look at the Back to Basics program and look at optimizing that. And also, Mr. Eric Wood was there, so he was talking about some sort of debt structures, some financial instruments that are beyond me. And so it was the Back to Basics program, and then there was also getting ready for the elections. The minister proposed that we put forward proposals on those bases.
but didn't the minister speak after they had made their presentation?
Yes, the presentation was exactly as you described. It was very generic and general.
Yeah.
Just basically saying this is where we are, this is what we've done, this is what our record is. I presented something that was a little bit more, this is what we hope to become. And then the minister
Yes.
says, well, he thinks that there's opportunities in these areas.
How many employees did you say Trillian has?
On that
TMC.
day, it was me and my COO.
But did you say how many?
No, I couldn't because I'd be lying. I got the presentation as part of my annexures. It's so embarrassing. I really hope that you'll don't.
Did you
look at
say
it.
what experience you had as a company?
Yes, but I'm talking about, the only thing I could put in there was my personal experience.
Yeah,
So I was basically putting my CV in there.
yeah, okay, all right. Mr. Slinger. Okay, so
Yeah.
you are in this meeting, the minister makes suggestions of what areas or what kind of work could be, you could look at and make proposals about, and then what happens after that? at the
And then we
meeting?
leave. We leave.
Okay.
I think there was some sort of discussions between them, but this was so long ago. I don't know all the specifics, but what I do know that happened subsequent to that meeting, or subsequent to the roadshow, if it's okay, if I could rather do that. The Oliver Wyman directors went back to Dubai. And as soon as they got back home, so it was probably the next day, they had started emailing me to start arranging that we move on these opportunities, right? Eric had instructed me to arrange another meeting with Mr.
That's
Peter.
Mr. Wood.
Mr. Wood, forgive me, Mr. Wood, had instructed me to arrange a meeting with Mr. Peter, which I reached out and I sent him an email, but I never got a response. However, Mr. Bobat had emailed me, or he had sent something, but he gave me a copy of the Back to Basics program so that at least we had some basis to start compiling a proposal for COCTA. And the Oliver Wyman directors had sent through to me a proposal on the nuclear program, and they were already discussing the change management stuff. So my relationship with Oliver Wyman directors remained for my entire tenure being 3 months. And we were working on these proposals, two for Eskom and one for COCTA.
Yeah. Did you ever receive any messages from Mr. Bobat by way
Yes.
of envelopes?
Yes. I received a few messages from Mr. Bobat.
How many?
What I've listed in my affidavit is what I remember. I wrote this some time ago, straight after I left.
Yeah.
So I believe my affidavit more.
No, I thought you mentioned a number.
No, a few.
Oh, a
the
few,
one,
okay.
The one was really, really funny.
And
Are
this
you
is-
talking about text messages, WhatsApp messages?
No, I'm going to explain now. The one was really funny. It was a
I'm sorry,
Gmail.
hang on. Are you talking about text messages, WhatsApp messages, telephone messages, or some letters?
I'm going to. The one was an email, and the one was an envelope. So I'm going to explain
Okay,
them now.
that's what, yeah.
Okay.
So it's not SMSs or WhatsApp messages?
No.
Okay.
So the one was an email to my Gmail account, my personal Gmail account, from a person by the name of Mika Peroz, as in Spanish, Peroz. And then I get and I'm like, I thought it's spam, right?
Sorry, just repeat that.
I thought it was spam. You know how you get junk mail? But I got a phone call from Mr. Bobat saying, did you get my email? And I said, what email? He's the one from Peroz. And I was like, oh, is that from you? And I don't recall what was in that specific email, but I still have the email, so I can take a look at it. But that is the one way that he communicated with me, which was bizarre, completely unexpected. The other was...
But before you move to the other, what does he say in that one?
I can't remember.
Well, before you go to the other one, complete your conversation with him when he called you to ask whether you received his email.
That's all that I remember. I just want to check in my affidavit under the Mohammed Bobat section if I actually mention it there.
That's on, well, you have him discussed on page 441, paragraph 34.
Okay. No, I don't mention it here. Chair,
I'm sorry, where about in this affidavit are you now, Mr. Sliger? The last time I knew we were at page 451.
Yes, Chair. We are now really talking about the position of Mr. Bobat, where she talks about him on page 441.
So
Yes,
we've gone back.
we don't have to go there because I see in my affidavit that I haven't mentioned this Mika Peroz, but I've got the email.
Well, if you're talking about what is there, we need to go there. Okay, all right.
But she's explaining that she didn't mention the email in the affidavit, but she has the email.
And I can give it to you
Yeah.
very easily. So there would,
I'm sorry. It's important that we get things as they happen. did you say that in that telephone conversation when he called, that is Mr. Robert, to ask you whether you received his message or his email, all that happened was that you asked him to confirm that, oh, that was from him, and he said yes, and that was the end of the conversation?
That was the end. It was very brief, and I don't remember the contents of that email. I think the contents of that email was him giving me his private phone number. I don't remember the details of it, but I'm happy to share that email with you.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was. You have got the email.
Yes, I still have it.
Is it in the bundle, Mr. Silega?
No, it's not in the bundle.
Yeah.
But I'll share
How
it
come
with
you
you.
didn't give it to us?
Because I didn't think. I sometimes question what's important and what will help you.
Yes, but simply from what you are telling me, on the face of it, it looks like he was hiding his identity, that he was the person from whom the message was coming, the email was coming.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I'm sharing it with
obviously-
you now.
And obviously, with what you knew at the time you wrote this, you signed this affidavit, you would know that that would be important.
This affidavit, to a large extent, was actually structured for the parliamentary inquiry. And I've
Yes.
tried, and I've really, my version of history has not changed. And there were a few changes that I made, that I had to correct for this submission.
Well, it was deposed to in September 2020. I guess what you may be meaning is that it was structured along the lines of whatever other affidavit you may have made, but it was done in 2020, and by
Correct.
then surely you knew that there would be some importance in attached to him not putting his name to that email.
I'm happy to submit a supplementary
Yes.
affidavit if I have to, and certainly will share all the information that I have.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Continue.
Thank you, Chair. I asked that question because we heard Ms. Motepu talk about you receiving an envelope.
I'm
from-
getting there still.
Yeah. So that's why I asked that question.
Yes.
Yes. Is there any other document that you have, or text message or WhatsApp message that you haven't given it to the legal team or told them about that is important based on what you know now?
I really question my understanding of what's important. What I can tell you I have is I've got a folder with quite a lot of hard copy things that I received during my tenure there at Trillian. And I originally gave it for safekeeping to my attorney. And I'm happy to give that folder to the commission in case you find something important.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked at it in 4 years.
Yeah.
But I still have it.
I think you must do that. Give them copies of what you have.
But it's an entirely large file. You can take the whole file. I don't need it.
That's why. No, you might need it some other time. So I think the commission can make copies
Okay.
Yes.
and then give you back
Okay.
the originals.
One thing that's in that file is the second message from Mr. Bobert.
Yes.
And that was one morning I come to work.
So, but let me also so the email that Mr. Bobert had sent you under a name you didn't, under a Spanish name, I think you said, was simply that he was giving you a number, and he said that's the number you must use to communicate with him, or what?
Yes, that's what I recall, Chair, but because I haven't looked at the email in such a long time and I'm under oath, I'd rather just give it to you as I have it in
okay.
native.
Okay, no, that's
I
fine.
haven't looked at it in such a long time. Okay,
So
that
no,
was
that's fine. Then you can go to the other message.
Okay, so that was the first message as I explained. The second message was one day I come to work, and on my desk is a white envelope, a white A4 envelope, but one of those thick ones. You know, like when you print like a whole stack of paper, so it's a big envelope. And it got my name on it. And I was quite early at work, so there weren't a lot of people. I think I was one of the first people at work that morning. So I was very surprised about where did this envelope come from.
You're saying you were the first weren't you alone? Weren't you the only one?
No, true story. No. I was the only one for TMC, but remember that there were Mark Pamensky was there for properties, for example, right? But I was the only one. I get this envelope.
And this is around about what, January, February, March?
I don't put a date in here. I suspect it was March because the person
2015.
2016, just before my resignation.
2016, yeah.
Just before my resignation.
Oh, she's on page 458.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Okay.
there one such envelope is mentioned, paragraph 66.
Okay. So just go back to how you came to work. You were the first one, and what happened?
And I see this envelope on my desk with my name on.
A big envelope.
A big envelope, a big A4 white,
Yeah.
big white envelope.
Yes.
The contents of that envelope are in this file that I will give to you. But it's a copy of a tender. Something about the back to basics thing as well. It was a lot of paperwork, and I didn't go through all of it.
But
And then
that would have rang a bell because it was proposed by Minister van Rooyen.
100%, but I didn't go through the details of it. I was so busy with other work as well. Compiling this proposal at the time was not my priority. I had other things to do. But I get a phone call from Mr. Bobet saying, "Did you get my delivery?
You get a what?
Did you get my delivery?"
Is it the same day that you got the email from
No,
him?
no.
These are different days.
Different days.
How far apart were the two?
It can't be more than 3 months. I was only
Yeah,
there
no.
for 3 months.
What
So
I mean
it's-
is, was it in March as well when you got the email, or was it January?
Could have been
Was it-
February. Could
Yeah,
have easily
okay,
have
all
been
right. But we
February.
will see from the email because we have got it.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
will give it to you.
Okay, so he phones you on the morning when you find this envelope on your desk. Was it on your desk?
Yes.
He phones you before you open it or after you open it?
Before I even opened it, and he says, "Did you get my delivery?"
And what did you say?
And I said, "Yes, is this from you?" He says, "Yes, it's from you. It should help you put together the proposal." So I was
Now, how did you know it was the envelope that you were seeing on your desk, which you hadn't opened, was from him?
because as soon as I did open it, you could see the Department of Cocta.
Yeah.
And he was at Cocta. I knew no one else at Cocta.
Yes, okay.
There was no logical reason for anybody else giving me this
Yes.
at
okay.
all.
The envelope, was it written at your name or addressed to you?
It just had my name written on it.
It had your name in handwriting?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether it was his handwriting?
I have no idea.
You don't know.
I have no idea.
And the documents inside, did they have any handwriting or signature?
I didn't look, Chair, but
you
I will
don't
give
know.
you everything.
Okay, all right.
But I don't recall.
There was
a
no
lot of-
letter addressed to you inside?
No, there was
were
no
just
nothing
documents. Yeah. Okay, all right.
If Mr. Bobet didn't phone me and explain that envelope to me, I would have thought it was trash because I wouldn't have had the context. There was nothing explaining why this has got my name on. I would have probably just thrown it away.
So, COCTA, of course, is the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Leaders. And this was, you say, March 2016. And you say the documents appear to be connected with the Back to Basics program. And 2016 was the year when there were going to be local government elections. I'm saying, yeah, I'm not asking you. Yeah, that's the year when there were going to be local government elections. I don't know whether they were in May or August, but okay, all right. So you receive this. He calls you, and apart from asking you to confirm whether you received his delivery, What else did you talk about in that telephone conversation?
Nothing. He just said this should help you put together the proposal. And that was the
Okay.
end of that was the end of the call.
Okay. Prior to that, had there been a discussion that you would put together a proposal within
Yes.
Trillian?
At the meeting with the minister, with the Oliver Wyman directors,
Yeah.
the minister said these are the areas that you could propose
Yeah,
in.
no, I remember that, but I'm just thinking the minister
between that, no.
could have said whatever, but you would Trillian could make a decision what to do and what not to do.
No, in between the meeting with the minister and receiving this envelope from Mr. Bobat, there were a few communications between myself and Oliver Wyman, but there were no communications between myself and the department.
Okay. You may continue, Mr. Slager.
Yes, so Mr. Bobat phones you and explains to you the contents of the envelope. I see this. Did you prepare the proposal?
The proposal was being drafted. So by the time I resigned, on the 19th of March, there were a few proposals that were being drafted between Trillian and Oliver Wyman. By the time I'd resigned, though, there was nothing submitted. Everything was still being worked on. And there are strings of emails that you can see in terms of the communication with these proposals. I couldn't possibly reference all of them here, but as you know, I've got a copy of my computer from Trillian, and I'm happy to give that copy of the computer to you.
Yes. Yeah. No, you should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the string of emails, is it between you and Mr. Bobat?
No, between myself and the Oliver Wyman directors about the opportunities at COCTA
Yeah.
and at Eskom.
I'm sorry. The emails involve correspondence between or among who and who?
Myself
Yeah.
and the Oliver Wyman directors
Yes.
for the opportunities at both Eskom and COCTA.
Okay. As far as you can recall, would those emails or any one of them reflect a discussion that would say whether these documents came from Mr. Bobat?
Not that I recall.
Nothing like
Mr.
that.
Bobat did not, from what I understand, Mr. Bobat did not just communicate with the Oliver Wyman directors. It was more like I was that channel.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Lega?
I see in paragraph 67 of your affidavit, on that page 458, you write, in addition, I would receive timeline, expectations and valuable budget information from Bobat, Mr. Bobat, to ensure that the proposal was received favorably.
Correct. So an extra U that I reference here is an email thread, I think, that is between myself and Mr. Bobat. If I remember this correctly,
Yes.
that's what it is. So you have that, but if I give you a copy of my computer, you'll have that as well anyway.
So this communication, timeline, expectations, and available budget information. Mr. Bobat is sending that to you by email.
If I recall correctly, I think so. I think what I had done, if I remember correctly, I think we had a structure of a proposal, and I sent it to him, and he commented on it, and he sent the comments back. And in those comments was this information, if I remember correctly. So yes, to answer your question, it was by email.
And at paragraph 68, you say, I realized that securing the work at COCTA had nothing to do with TMC's history, nor lack of employees to do the work. What did it have to do with?
I guess that is maybe slightly speculative, because by the time I left, there wasn't necessarily work secured at COCTA, but all indications were that if we had submitted a proposal when it was in its final state, there was no indications that it wouldn't be met with favorably. So I can't answer your question directly. I can just tell you this from what I know. Trillian was just really lucky. So that even if you don't have employees and you don't even have work history, you can still go and work in a ministry like Cocteau. I know that when I try and sell my services as a person, I have to demonstrate previous achievements. And Trillian did not have that. And yet the progression of these proposals had so much momentum, and none of the feedback that you received was negative to suggest that you didn't have a shot.
My recollection of Ms. Motepu's evidence was that prior to Mr. Boebert being appointed as the special advisor to Minister van Rooyen, a group of them, or the officials of regiments, as it was becoming or moving away to become Trillian out of it, by Mr. Eric Wood, they were told that Mr. Boebert will be placed in that office of the minister to ensure that work comes to Trillian. What was your observation of the situation?
So I had alluded to something like this earlier, and I told you that when Mr. Boebert was at Treasury, Mr. Angel didn't say anything to me. However, when Mr. Boebert had moved to Cocteau, and I spoke to Mr. Angel numerous times in one day, so I cannot tell you the time and the date because we literally spoke numerous times on one day, every day, with the exception of Saturdays. And in one of the phone calls, I did ask Mr. Angel, why do we need Mr. Boebert? Why can't we just do what other people do, reply to an RFP, do what normal companies do to get work? And Mr. Boebert did say that he is positioned there to open the taps for us. Sorry, Mr. Angel said that Mr. Boebert is positioned there to open the taps and create opportunities for Trillian. But I must appreciate that Trillian does not have people, and it doesn't have a history, and we can only ever do this work if we partner with global organizations such as Mckinsey and Oliver Wyman. So Mr. Angel did explicitly say that to me, but not when Mr. Boebert was at Treasury, but rather when he was at Cocteau.
Yes. You reference instances where you would interview candidates, I think, for Trillian, or TMC, and that you would do so with Mr. Boebert. Now, my question is, and if he is now an employee of the state, what did he have to do with Trillian or TMC?
No. So would you mind if I correct the statement slightly?
Yes.
My understanding was that before Mr. Boebert moved, he was in fact looking after the management consulting area of regiments. So hence, had he not moved, he would have taken my job at Trillian, right? So he knew the people that would be transitioning to Trillian. And he had a few, if I may call them sort of favorites, so to say. During my relationship with Mckinsey, I was aware of the people that would be coming. So it wasn't a surprise for me on the 1st of March. There was a list that I received from the HR director of regiments saying that these are the people that would be transitioning. And in round about February, I was working with Mckinsey to try and to be ahead of the curve and be proactive and try and already get placements for these people on the Eskom work, right? And Mckinsey wouldn't take these people. They kept on saying that some of these people were incompetent, they've worked with them before at Transnet, they don't want to work with them again. And I was stuck because I had no working history with these individuals that would be coming over. So I did reach out to Mr. Boebert. I think I first reached out to the HR lady at Regiments, and she suggested or recommended that I reach out to Mr. Boebert to get a view from him. And Mr. Boebert would get involved in those types of, he would give me that feedback. But there was one specific example that I think is worth noting. There was a gentleman, and I don't recall his surname, that was promised a promotion when he moved to Trillian. The specific gentleman I tried to place him in the projects with Mckinsey, and every single partner at Mckinsey refused to work with him. They've sent me performance reviews of this gentleman. They wanted him nowhere.
Is this a South African gentleman?
Yes, I think it is Mr. Maseko. Mr. Maseko with a K. And I then compiled the organogram for what Trillian would look like, and I did not promote this gentleman because everybody came to Trillian on the levels that they were at regiments. And this gentleman was so upset that he was very clear with me, saying to me, I was promised a promotion by, we called Mr. Bobek Mo. So I'm just saying verbatim to you. Mo promised me a promotion. I said, yeah, but I'm not Mo. I'm Bianca. I need to see you deliver before I can promote you. Trillian Management Consulting is my company, it's not Mo's. He was so furious at me, he phoned Mr. Bobet, and Mr. Bobet phoned me to say, how dare I not do it? So Mr. Bobet was, although he didn't work for Trillian, you sometimes felt that he knew more about Trillian than I even knew about it.
Oh, he didn't work for Trillian, for TMC.
Not that I certainly didn't employ any contracts, sign any employment contracts with him. Mr. Bobet was not one of my employees.
And would you know whether he was on TMC's payroll?
Did I know that?
Would you have known?
No, because I couldn't see the finances, because remember the finances were handled centrally,
Okay.
and the CEOs weren't allowed to see this. I knew all the employees that came from regiments, got all those details, and who would be coming into my team, and Mr. Bobet was not on that list.
Do you know about the bonus payment that was made to you?
Nope.
You don't know.
Could he have been your boss without you knowing?
I know, no.
Okay, all right, Mr. Silega.
Yes, let's deal now with TMC's relationship with Eskom. We can move there unless if you have anything else to add to what we've done.
Will that start with the part of the roadshow, as you called it, that involved the CFO of Eskom? The reason why I'm asking is because you said the roadshow was going to involve meeting the CFO of Transnet, the Minister of Copter, and the CFO of Eskom, and you have told me about the two, but not about meeting the CFO of Eskom, as far as I recall.
Yes.
So I'm expecting you to complete the roadshow.
Yes. Yes, I think as we go into your relations with Eskom, you need to touch on that.
Okay. You'll lead me there?
Yeah, Chair, we are 2 minutes away from lunchtime.
Yes, okay, maybe let's take the lunch break, so when we come back, then she can tell us about Trillian and Eskom.
That's good.
We'll adjourn and we'll resume at 2. We adjourn.